This is the story of something that happened to me when I used to work retail. A disturbing, true retail horror story I'll never forget. I'm going to tell you everything, and I swear, it's all true. You know how people say retail is hell? I used to think that was just a joke. But after what I went through, I know better. I worked the late shift at a small retail store, part of a chain that sold random home goods, electronics, snacks, pretty much a little bit of everything. I usually closed up with one or two other people, but that night, I was alone. The manager had left early, and the other employee called in sick. So it was just me and a long, quiet shift. The store stayed open till 11 p.m., and the last hour was always dead. Barely anyone came in, especially on weekdays. That night, everything was normal at first. I was just fixing up shelves, counting down the drawer, and waiting for the clock to hit closing time. Around 10:15, the door opened, and this man walked in. Something about him instantly made me feel off. He wasn't dirty or homeless looking, but he was pale, too pale, and he had this strange way of moving, like he was trying to glide instead of walk, and he didn't make eye contact, not once. Just stared at the shelves like he'd never seen cereal boxes or shampoo bottles before. I said the usual line, "Let me know if you need anything." But he didn't even react. No nod. Nothing. He just walked straight down one of the aisles. Watched him on the security mirrors for a bit. He walked slowly, like he was studying every single item. I figured maybe he was just high or something, so I went back to cleaning. Then, things started getting weird. I heard something fall in, aisle 3, a loud crash like glass shattering. I ran over expecting a broken jar or bottle, but when I got there, everything was perfectly fine. Not a single thing was out of place. I looked down both ends of the aisle, no sign of the guy. I called out, "Hey, sir, you okay?" No answer. I walked the whole store. He wasn't in any of the aisles. Now this store wasn't big. There weren't any exits besides the front door and the emergency exit in the back, which was always alarmed. If he'd left through the front, I would have heard the bell. If he used the back, the alarm would have gone off. He was just gone. I went back to the register, confused and trying to brush it off. Maybe I missed him leaving. Maybe he was hiding. I told myself I'd check the cameras after close. I was creeped out, sure, but I still had a job to finish. About 10 minutes later, I was in the stock room stacking some boxes when I heard it again. Crash. Same sound. Glass shattering. This time it came from the front of the store. I ran out fast. I was already on edge and my heart was racing. But again, nothing was broken. Not a single thing. The shelves were perfect. But then I saw something that made me freeze. The man. He was standing completely still at the end of aisle 7, facing away from me. I was about to say something, ask if he was okay or needed help, but then he started moving. Very slowly, he turned his head. Not his body, just his head. And I saw his face. It wasn't normal. His mouth was stretched too wide, like he was smiling, but it wasn't a human smile. His eyes were wide open and glassy, and he had this expression like he was happy to see me, but for the wrong reasons. I took a step back. "Sir, we're closing soon," I managed to say, though my voice was shaking. He didn't reply. He just slowly lifted his hand and pointed at me. That was enough. I turned and ran straight to the office, locked the door. I was shaking, trying to breathe. I looked at the security monitor. He was gone again. I rewound the camera feed. I needed to prove to myself this was real, that I wasn't going crazy. But on the footage, there was no man. Not in aisle 3, not in aisle 7. No one had walked in at 10:15. The door didn't open at all. I checked the last hour of footage twice. I was the only person in the store. I wanted to call someone, my manager, the cops, anyone. But what was I going to say? A man walked in, but he didn't show up on camera? They'd think I was high, or losing it. I waited in the office until 11. Then, very carefully, I stepped out and locked up. I rushed home without looking back once. That night, I didn't sleep. Every little sound in my apartment made me jump. I kept seeing his face, those stretched lips, that wide, glassy stare. I told myself I must have imagined it. I was tired, overworked, maybe even starting to crack under pressure. But then, a few days later, I talked to one of the older employees who had worked there for years. I didn't tell him what I saw, but I asked casually if he'd ever experienced anything weird in the store. He looked at me for a second and then said, "You saw the guy, didn't you?" I froze. I asked him what he meant. He told me that years ago, maybe a decade back, a man had died in that store. He had a breakdown, attacked another customer, and then suddenly dropped dead in one of the aisles. Heart attack, they said. But he had a twisted smile on his face when they found him. And ever since then, strange things happened. Items falling with no cause. Unseen footsteps. And sometimes, just sometimes, someone would see him. He said the others called him the late shopper. Always shows up just before closing. Never talks. Just stares. Sometimes points. I asked if anyone ever got hurt. He didn't answer that. Just told me not to work alone if I could help it. After that, I never stayed alone at closing again. I'd swap shifts, make up excuses, do whatever it took. I even thought about quitting. Eventually I did. But I never forgot that night. And sometimes, when I walk past a store just before it closes, I wonder if he's still in there. Smiling, pointing, watching someone else. So if you ever work retail and you're stuck on a late shift and you hear something crash, even though nothing's broken, don't ignore it. And if you see a pale man staring at you from the end of an aisle with a smile too wide to be real, don't wait for him to point, just run. This is the story of something truly disturbing that happened to a friend of mine named Rachel when she was working at a retail clothing store. And I'm telling you this because it stayed with me ever since she told me. You know how some stories just feel wrong when you hear them? This is one of those stories. Every time I walk into a quiet store late in the evening, I remember what happened to her. So listen carefully. This story is real, and it will get under your skin. Rachel had just started a new job at a women's clothing shop called Belle and Ivy. It was a cozy little boutique tucked inside an old shopping plaza, the kind of place that played soft music and smelled like lavender all the time. The store wasn't very big, and it only stayed open till 9 p.m., which Rachel liked. She was 23 at the time, just out of college, and trying to save money before grad school. Her first 2 weeks were uneventful. She learned the register, organized clothes by color, chatted with customers. The usual. Most shifts were slow, and by 8 p.m. the place would be almost empty. One of the managers usually stayed with her during closing hours, but sometimes when it was especially quiet, they'd let Rachel close alone. One Thursday night, her manager, Linda, left early. Rachel didn't mind. She liked being alone in the store. It gave her time to fold clothes perfectly, clean up, and daydream a little while soft music played in the background. At around 8:30, just as she was putting away a display of scarves, the bell above the door rang. A woman walked in. Rachel said her usual, "Hi there. Let me know if you need anything." The woman didn't answer. She was wearing a long, dark green coat and had straight black hair that almost reached her waist. She walked very slowly, too slowly, toward the back of the store. Rachel assumed maybe the woman was just shy, or maybe in a bad mood. She didn't want to be pushy, so she went back to her folding. But then something started to feel wrong. The store was quiet, but Rachel kept hearing small sounds, like whispers, very faint. At first, she thought it might be the music playing too low, but when she paused to listen, there was no music, just silence, and the faintest sound of someone breathing. She turned toward the back of the store, where the woman had gone, but no one was there. She called out, "Ma'am, we close in about 15 minutes." No response. She walked slowly toward the back, passing racks of blouses and dresses. She reached the changing rooms. There were 3 stalls. The first was open, the second too. The third one had its door, slightly ajar. She gently knocked on it. "Excuse me, are you okay in there?" The door creaked open on its own. The stall was empty. Rachel felt a cold chill crawl down her spine. She turned back around quickly, and for a moment, just a second, she saw the woman standing near the front of the store again, still, staring directly at her. Rachel took a shaky breath and started walking toward the counter. She didn't want to panic. Maybe the woman was just strange. Maybe she had some issue and wasn't trying to scare anyone. But as she reached the register, the bell above the door rang again. Except, the woman didn't leave. She was gone, vanished. Rachel checked the cameras the next day with Linda just to ease her mind. On the footage, you could see the front door open at 8:30, but the woman's face was never visible. She appeared as a blurry shape, like the camera didn't know how to focus on her. Even stranger, the door never opened again. There was no footage of her leaving. Linda laughed it off. "Maybe it was a glitch," she said. "Those cameras are ancient." Rachel wasn't convinced. She thought maybe she was tired, maybe stressed. She tried to move on. But the next week, it happened again. Same shift, same time, same long green coat. Rachel was sweeping near the dressing rooms when she looked up, and the woman was just standing there, right in front of the mirror, not moving. Her reflection wasn't right. It wasn't matching her. It was delayed, like a half-second too slow. Rachel froze. She whispered, "Can I help you?" The woman turned. Her eyes were completely black. Rachel ran straight out of the store. She waited outside, called Linda in tears, and refused to go back in alone. From then on, she never closed by herself again. And for a while, nothing strange happened. No woman in green, no cold chills. Until one day Linda decided to stay late and work the shift with Rachel. She joked about it, saying, "Let's meet your ghost lady." Rachel laughed nervously, but a part of her was grateful not to be alone. That night, everything was calm, until Linda went into the back room to check inventory. Rachel was folding scarves at the counter when she heard it, the bell over the door. She looked up. No one. She walked to the entrance. Still no one. Then she heard Linda scream from the back room. Rachel ran. Linda was standing by the stock shelves, pale and shaking. "I saw her," she whispered. "She was right behind me, in the mirror, but when I turned around, no one." That was the last straw for Rachel. She quit the following day, and here's the scariest part. 2 years later, Rachel was in another city visiting her cousin, walking through a vintage store, and there, near the back, among racks of coats, was the same long green coat and a woman wearing it. She had long black hair, and she was smiling. Rachel left the store immediately. She told me she didn't look back. She doesn't shop alone anymore, and she never, ever walks into a store near closing time. So the next time you're in a quiet boutique late at night, and you see someone in a long, dark coat who doesn't speak, don't try to help. Don't follow. And whatever you do, don't look in the mirror. This is the story of a guy named Jason. He was your typical college student, always trying to make a quick buck, balancing classes and part-time jobs. One night, he took on a new gig at a small, somewhat shabby bookstore in the middle of town. It was the kind of place that no one ever noticed, tucked away between two larger, flashier shops. The sign outside was faded, and the name, Wandering Pages, didn't really stand out much. But the owner, Mr. Finch, was friendly enough, and Jason needed the extra cash. It was a quiet place, the kind of store where people came in for a book, picked one out and left. Nothing like the busy chain bookstores with tons of people. The store was old-fashioned, with dusty shelves stacked high with books, some of them looking like they hadn't been touched in years. There was a musty smell, a mix of old paper and wood. Jason didn't mind it much. It was a perfect job for him to study in between customers. He worked the night shifts, which started at 6 p.m. and ended at 10 p.m. Mr. Finch always left him alone, saying the store didn't get many customers that late. Jason didn't mind. It was peaceful. Most nights, he'd be reading or texting his friends. There was only one thing that bothered him: the back room. The back room was locked most of the time. Mr. Finch had always told Jason that it was off limits, something about old inventory and paperwork that he didn't want customers seeing. Jason never thought much about it. He was just there to do his job. But over time, he couldn't help but wonder what was behind that door. There was a strange aura about it. Sometimes, when Jason was alone, he'd hear faint noises coming from that direction, almost like whispers or the sound of something heavy dragging across the floor. It was always quiet, but it was enough to make him feel uneasy. One night, after the clock hit 9:30 p.m. and the store was as empty as ever, Jason decided to take a quick look. He hadn't seen Mr. Finch all evening, and the sound from the back room had been more distinct than usual. He hesitated for a second, but curiosity got the best of him. He walked to the back of the store, his shoes squeaking against the wooden floor. The door was just as old and worn as the rest of the store, with a rusty handle that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Jason reached out, his hand shaking just slightly. With a little push, the door creaked open. What he saw inside shocked him. The room was small, barely big enough for a desk, some chairs, and rows of old bookshelves filled with even older books. But it wasn't the books that caught his attention. It was the strange, glowing object sitting in the center of the room. It looked like a book, but it was different. The cover was completely black, with no title, no writing at all, just dark, smooth leather that shimmered in the dim light. Jason stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. Something about that book, he couldn't explain it, but it called to him. His hand reached out, almost of its own accord. As soon as his fingers brushed against the cover, the room seemed to darken, and a cold wind swept through the air. Suddenly, he heard footsteps behind him. "Jason?" Mr. Finch's voice echoed from the doorway. Jason jumped, spinning around to find Mr. Finch standing there, looking as calm as ever. But there was something different in his eyes, something unsettling. Sorry, Mr. Finch, Jason stammered, pulling his hand away from the book. I was curious. I didn't mean to. It's okay, Jason, Mr. Finch interrupted, his voice low. But you shouldn't have touched it. Jason felt a shiver run down his spine. He wasn't sure why, but he could tell Mr. Finch wasn't just talking about the book. The thing is, Mr. Finch continued, that book has a way of getting into people's heads. It makes them want things they shouldn't have. Jason tried to laugh it off. Is it some kind of family heirloom? No, Mr. Finch said, his eyes darkening. It's not. But it's been here longer than I have. And it's not from this world. Jason froze. What do you mean? Mr. Finch walked into the room slowly, his gaze never leaving the black book. I don't know exactly where it came from, but I know what it does. It takes what you want the most and makes you believe you can have it. But in the end, it always takes something from you in return. Jason's mind raced. Was Mr. Finch just crazy? Or was he telling the truth? The whole thing felt like something out of a horror movie. What are you saying? Jason asked, his voice barely a whisper. Mr. Finch stepped closer to the book, his eyes still locked on it. All I know is no one should ever open it. The last person who did, well, they're gone now. Just like that. Gone. Jason took a step back. Gone? Vanished, Mr. Finch said simply. No one remembers them, not even their family. It's like they were erased. Jason's mind was spinning. He needed to get out of the room. But as he turned to leave, he heard that soft whisper again. The one that had been in the air before, only this time it was louder, closer. Jason. He whipped around, his heart racing. The book had opened on its own. The pages were turning, as if some invisible force was flipping them. And then he saw it. A name, his name. It was written in bold, dark letters on the page, glowing faintly. Jason couldn't move. His eyes locked on the name, and for a moment it felt like the room was spinning. Do you see it? Mr. Finch's voice was quiet now, filled with something darker. That's how it works. It calls you. It gives you a glimpse of what you desire most. But then, it takes. Jason didn't know what to do. The name on the page wasn't just, it was everything he ever wanted. His dreams, his future, all laid out before him. But it felt wrong. His gut told him to run, to get out of there, but his feet felt like they were glued to the floor, and that's when it happened. The lights flickered, the room grew colder, and suddenly, the whispers turned into voices, voices that weren't his own. The air grew thick, and Jason could barely breathe. The book began to pull at him, like it was reaching out, trying to drag him in. And then, just as he thought he might lose control, he stumbled backward, crashing into Mr. Finch. Leave. It, Jason, Mr. Finch shouted, grabbing him by the shoulders. You have to leave now. Jason didn't think twice. He bolted for the door, not looking back. The last thing he heard was the soft sound of pages turning. He never went back to that bookstore, and, as for the book, Jason doesn't know what happened to it. But he knows one thing for sure. Some things should never be touched, no matter how badly you want them. So, if you ever walk past a bookstore called Wandering Pages, and you see a strange, glowing book in the back, just keep walking, because some desires are better left untouched. This is the story of a man named Ethan, who thought he understood the world well. Too well, in fact. He had always been the logical type, a scientist by profession, working as a researcher in a prestigious university. He didn't believe in ghosts, didn't trust anything supernatural, and he certainly didn't believe in urban legends. But sometimes life has a way of showing you that your beliefs, no matter how solid they seem, are not always the truth. It started innocently enough. Ethan had been assigned a project that involved studying the history of abandoned places in the city. His team was tasked with exploring forgotten buildings, old factories, and rundown houses to gather data about their history and the people who once lived there. Most of the places were unremarkable, just dusty rooms and cracked floors. But there was one house that stood out. It wasn't like the others. The house was located on the outskirts of the city, at the edge of a forest. It had been abandoned for decades, but it had always intrigued Ethan. The locals called it the Hollow House. No one knew exactly when it had been built, but rumors said that it had once belonged to a wealthy family. The story went that the Ew family had vanished mysteriously one night, and no one had ever seen or heard from them again. Since then, the house had stood empty, its windows dark and its door locked. The rumors about the house were strange and chilling. People claimed to have seen lights flickering inside, heard voices when no one was around, and some even said they saw shadows moving in the windows. Ethan didn't buy any of it. He saw it as nothing more than a collection of tall tales, but he was intrigued by the idea of a mystery house. And when the project lead suggested they visit it, Ethan didn't hesitate. He wanted to prove once and for all that there was nothing supernatural about this place. It was just another old, empty building. The first night they arrived at the Hollow House, the air was thick with fog. The moonlight barely pierced through, the clouds casting an eerie glow over the dilapidated structure. Ethan felt a twinge of unease, but he quickly pushed it away. After all, it was just an old house, nothing more. The team spent the first few hours documenting the house's condition. The floors creaked under their feet, the walls were cracked and peeling, and the air was musty with age. Nothing out of the ordinary. Ethan moved from room to room, taking notes and photographs, but as the night wore on, something strange began to happen. At first, it was subtle. There was a faint noise like a whisper. He looked around, but no one else seemed to hear it. He brushed it off. The house was old, after all. It was probably the wind or the house settling. But as the hours passed, the whispers grew louder. Soon, he could hear them clearly. They were voices, soft, indistinct, like a conversation happening just out of reach. He tried to focus, but no matter where he went in the house, the voices followed him. His heart began to race. He told himself it was nothing, just his imagination playing tricks on him. Then came the footsteps. They started out faint, barely noticeable, like someone walking in the room above him. Ethan looked up, confused. He was certain that the upstairs was empty. The team had checked the entire house before they started their work, and there was no one else there. But the footsteps continued. The sound of slow, deliberate steps echoed through the floorboards. "Ethan," a voice called out behind him. It was Maria, one of his colleagues. She looked pale, her eyes wide with fear. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice trembling. Ethan nodded, though he didn't want to admit that he had heard it too. "It's probably just the house," he said, trying to sound convincing. "Old buildings make strange noises," but Maria wasn't buying it. "I don't think so," she said. "I think something's here." Ethan laughed nervously. "Come on, Maria. We're just hearing things. Let's finish up and head back. It's getting late." But as they moved toward the stairs to leave, they both froze. At the top of the stairs stood a figure. No more than a shadow, but a figure nonetheless. It was tall, its outline indistinct, its features impossible to make out. The figure, stood motionless as if watching them. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. "Maria, do you—" He didn't finish his sentence. The figure was gone, vanishing into the darkness without a sound. For a moment, neither of them moved. They just stood there, staring at the spot where the figure had been. Then, without a word, they bolted out of the room and ran downstairs to the front door. But when they reached it, the door was locked. It hadn't been locked when they entered. Panic set in. They tried to force the door open, but it wouldn't budge. The house seemed to be closing in on them. The air grew thick and oppressive. Ethan's mind raced. There had to be an explanation. Maybe the lock was broken, maybe someone had locked it from the outside, maybe... Then the voices started again. Louder this time. Clearer. "Leave. Now." Ethan's blood ran cold. He could hear them as if they were right beside him. They were calling to him, pleading with him to leave. He looked around, his eyes wide with fear, but there was no one there. "Leave." The voice came again, this time followed by a loud bang from the upstairs. Ethan spun around, his heart pounding. The footsteps were back, this time running toward him. He felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. "Maria!" he shouted. "Get out of here!" But Maria was gone. Ethan rushed to the window, desperate to escape. The glass shattered as he threw his weight against it, the jagged pieces falling to the ground. He climbed through the broken window and jumped to the ground below, landing with a thud. He didn't stop to look back. He ran as fast as he could, not stopping until he reached the nearest streetlight. Gasping for air, he looked back at the house. It stood silent now, dark and empty, as though nothing had ever happened. But Ethan knew what he had experienced. The house had been alive. It had wanted them to stay, to listen. The next morning, Ethan went back to the house with the police. They searched it top to bottom, but they found nothing. No sign of Maria, no trace of anything unusual. But Ethan knew the truth. The Hollow House had claimed her, just as it had claimed the family before her. And as for Ethan, he couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. The whispers still haunted him, calling his name when the wind was just right, urging him back to the house. But no matter how tempting it was, he knew he could never return. Some places he learned the hard way are best left forgotten. If you ever find yourself walking past an old house hidden in the shadows at the edge of town, and you hear faint whispers calling you, don't listen. Some things are better left alone.